Hopefully everything that was laid out made sense, and I got another accepted.
Of our doing, right?
Good morning, everyone. I believe we're all here. It's a couple minutes after 8, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us today. I guess we'll start with the roll call.
Yes, sir. Mr. Barham?
Here.
Mr. Bento?
Here.
Ms. Rudisell? Here. Mr. Wallace?
Here.
Mr. Garner?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. The minutes from the last meeting, August 26, have been distributed electronically. I presume everyone's had a chance to read them. Any discussion on these minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion to have the minutes accepted as presented. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Rose? I spoke briefly with Ms. Lane earlier. I understand our financials are still not quite up to date. You want to just, Andrew, just to sort of explain to everybody where we are with that? I know all we have right now is a bank balance, which we'll postpone a vote on that, but if you want to just let everybody know what's going on with the financials.
So we should be in the process of closing out 2014, well, FY14, which means FY15 will be available for your hard statements for a vote.
Okay, so we will see those at the next meeting, is that correct?
I believe so. And it will be all of the statements from July, August,
Okay.
and September.
That's fine. Well, that basis, I would say that we would postpone any kind of a vote on the financials since we don't have a balance sheet at this point in time. Is there any need for any kind of a motion on that? Okay. We'll leave that as it is. I guess just moving along here, I understand we have Mr. Andrew Sinclair here with the Virginia Port Authority, and Laura, again, thanks for joining us. Andrew, if you have any general comments, I understand there's a presentation that we would like to see at an upcoming meeting, but maybe if you could just give us a brief status as to what's going on.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. I've worked with Mallory for years, so you are in good hands. I had presented to City Council a couple weeks ago a presentation that I think you all have been given a copy of the presentation itself, really talking about what's going on at the port as a whole, and then focusing on PMT as well. We were very excited that that facility has reopened, and then it will be having its first vessel call on the first week of October, scheduled for October 3rd, pending any changes from the shipping company. But we're very excited about that and the opportunities that it'll bring in terms of just reducing the overall startup costs for any other customers that may go to that facility. We've already invested in the infrastructure for security and the gates and everything else. So we're very excited about that. Happy at a later date when your schedule allows to go into more detail. But I'm available. Laura, of course, is obviously available, but I'm available if you all need anything. And then we've got another new employee, Sarah McCoy, who's our local government and community affairs manager, and she'll be able to help you with anything you need as well.
Okay, good. What, if you know, what services will be calling PMT? You aware of that now?
The
Indus Express is the first one that will be calling over there. There will be a total of about 4 services. Not all of those have been completely finalized, but they'll be rolled in over the next 30 to 60 days.
Is it basically all container, any roll-on, roll-off, or any?
What we are focusing on for the short-term opening right now is containerized traffic. It'll be a wheeled operation, which is different than what has been there in the past and what is at the other facilities. meaning that the ship-to-shore crane will pick a container up off the ship and place it directly onto a chassis. And it won't be put on the ground. There won't be stacks multiple high except for in the empty container yard. So it'll go from the ship directly onto a chassis. It'll be moved around the terminal with our hustlers, and then an over-the-road truck can come on, hook up directly to that chassis and drive off. And then for export containers, it'll work the opposite. They'll come in, they'll drop the whole thing, the chassis included. The box will stay on the chassis until it's picked up by the crane and put onto the ship for export.
So the services that are coming over there are going to be services that aren't associated with any of the consortiums, correct? Like,
It'll be, yeah, it's gonna be because the cranes that are on PMT right now are the smallest cranes that we have. They're post-Panamax grade, but they're not the super post-Panamax cranes. You're not gonna have the largest ships call in there. You're gonna have 5,000 TEU type ships that'll call there. We're looking for annually about 75 to 100,000 containers.
Okay, great, thank you very much, I appreciate it. I guess we'll move on to the main focus of our business, which is the EPA Superfund update. Randy Sturgeon is here with the EPA, as well as Mr. Green with the Virginia DEQ. And Randy, I'll go ahead and turn this over to you, and mainly, I guess we're looking to you to be able to provide us answers to any questions with regards to the acquisition of the school board property and how all that's going to play out. So I'll just let you take it over.
Thank you for having me this morning. What we're going to talk about today has been the culmination of probably a decade of discussions that started when Nita worked for the school district, and we got to talking about some what I consider win-win opportunities with the school district property. And Mallory just asked me to give a quick update about where the site is at the moment. We've completed an offshore wall that provides a area to dispose of contaminated sediment, but it also forms a bulkhead, a nice marine bulkhead with that you can tie up barges and stuff like that to it. There's actually a loading area already right here that Atlantic Wood can ship material off because we're using up their waterfront for the next several years. Because the wall that's constructed is blocking the storm water that runs down Elm Avenue, we constructed a new storm sewer that goes across the site and discharges into the river. That's been completed. Eventually, once we have this new land here, there'll be inlets put into it, so the surface water from those will also go through there. And because those are done, last week we started pumping the water out from behind the wall. In anticipation of the dredging, the Corps had provided Mallory this information in August. The Corps awarded last week the dredging contract to Sevenson Environmental, whom I've worked with before. They do a great job. It's for the initial 50,000 cubic yards of dredging, as well as we're having to put wick drains and do a lot of prep work behind the wall. And the initial 50,000 cubic yards, we're going to start up north, and will take us to about here, and should get us out of the road of the development that PER Properties has been working on.
Andy, how much is that project cost, that phase?
The initial base bid is $14 million. We haven't, since the award was just last week, we haven't even scheduled a pre-construction meeting. Later this fall, we'll start getting a detailed schedule in. I hope to start work this fall. And I know that their original proposal had some 24-hour-a-day dredging in it. So it's actually going to take less time than what I had originally anticipated, which is good. But the reason we're here today is that only about half the material we're going to dredge out here can fit behind the wall. And the design calls for the other half to go in a landfill on Atlantic Woods property. Originally, before the new bridge was built, this landfill was going to go all the way up to Elm Avenue. When Ppic came in and bought part of that property, the smaller you shrink that landfill, the higher up it goes. And Atlantic Wood has always been concerned about the height of the landfill. One of the other things that happened is Atlantic Wood had some pentachlorophenol and creosote lagoons in this area of their property right adjacent to the school district property. And we went out and mixed cement and clay, fly ash and clay a couple of years ago. And one of the things we found is a little bit of that had migrated over to the school district property. And we treated that, and while we had to move the electrical power poles for the school district property. When we did that, areas that we thought were clean came up contaminated, which at the time, our first view was it was not related to Atlantic Wood, but having gone back and looked at data more closely, there's an area in here that is impacted by the Superfund site, coupled with the fact that, you know, this used to be owned by the Navy. It probably had a similar history to some of what Atlantic Wood did. There's war material, I believe, stored there from the old aerial photographs. And the school district has added their own underground storage tank. I know that there appears to be groundwater contamination from the Navy landfills under part of it. So it's got its own environmental issues. So the idea came up is, can we expand this landfill down through the school district property? And some of this opportunity came up because the school district wanted to move their bus operations anyway. And this 5 acres will replace this and allow us to lower the landfill by a couple of feet. And it will also provide a clean cap on the school district property and raise it up so it doesn't flood the way it has the past 3 or 4 years, which has led to the school district having to get out of there. And you may remember that, I don't know, 4+ years ago, the Ppic was involved in trying to coordinate some efforts between the school district and the city to see if there was opportunities for the school district to move off. And eventually that has taken place. And so we're at a point right now where, you know, last spring we agreed with DEQ that we wouldn't expand this landfill without DEQ's approval. And part of the reason for that is with expanding the landfill, the cost of the cap is going to increase a little bit. And because EPA is paying for this cleanup, DEQ is required to pay 10% of that cost. Plus, under the law, they're required to take on the operation maintenance of that landfill. And DEQ is already paying, this is a very expensive site, they've already committed a lot of money, and so the idea was they were generally okay with it if it became a non-financial issue to them. And so through meetings with the city, and I believe a state senator got involved, there's been an agreement worked out in the past month or 6 weeks between DEQ and the city and the school district where DEQ plans to put a lien on the property to cover the extra couple $100,000 they may have to pay, and the city's going to do the O&M on the property. The reason we're here today is that the goal is, once we get the landfill built, is to, from what we always discussed, for it to become like a brownfield, for it to, you know, private piece of property to be developed. The city actually owns a 30-foot strip of this land, and then the school district owns the rest of it. And so I think what the discussion is today is, instead of EPA working with an access agreement from the city and the school district for the next 3, 4, 5 years till we get this completed, and then the property become part of PPIC for development, that the property, both pieces of those properties become ownership of PPIC. EPA would have an access agreement with PPIC for use of that property. We're going to go in and tear the buildings down. Some of it will be used probably for storage for Atlantic Wood, who can't use this part of their site for a while. And then as we get this done, they'll put material back on top of the landfill, and we'll build out the landfill on the rest of the property. And so my understanding is you guys are going to have a discussion and hopefully a vote on that. EPA needs access to it very quickly because we're soon want to go out there and do the hazmat. We've got to go into all the buildings and look for asbestos and those types of things. And the Corps is about ready to award the contract to get those torn down. Yes?
Randy, a couple questions for you on this. Number one, on the cap, how high are you estimating that the cap would be on the school property?
At the moment, 8 to 12 feet above the current grade.
12 feet above.
8 to 12. So one of the things that will go along with that, we've been working with Atlantic Wood to design an entranceway that they can drive their gantry cranes up on top of the landfill.
Mm-hmm.
We will have to begin working with PPIC to find out what kind of entranceway it wants to this landfill and what kind of surface cover it wants when we're done, so that it becomes the what you guys would consider the most usable piece of property.
And when you're doing that, you're deciding at that point in time what kind of cover you want and what kind of grade in that. Whose responsibility is that going to be on? Is that going to be on PPIC's?
To do that work?
No, to put the the cost and everything else.
No, all that's part of the cleanup.
Okay.
It just said, instead of making a generic landfill, that may have a steep sided slope, and then somebody who wants to develop it has to come back and cut a driveway into it, for instance. I just assume do that while we're building it.
Right.
And if you want a grass cover, we can do that. If you want, I think probably the two options are grass cover or crusher run cover, which is what's going to be on Atlantic Wood. However, if timing works out, and this actually happened at the ABEX Superfund site where the new fire station is if we get close to when we're actually covering the sediment, and a buyer comes in and says, we want to put a concrete slab here, or we'd like we want to run a utility way here, then we can incorporate, I don't know about a concrete slab, but we can clean out some utility ways and stuff like that as part of the cap, which my opinion on things like this, the government spending money, society should get the most benefit out of it that we can, and if we can take advantage of that and help a private party out at the same time, because timing works out okay, then I like those kinds of opportunities.
And you say 3 to 5 years is what you're thinking is going to be a good completion on this?
I give that as a max. The dredging could be done in less than 2 years, the actual dredging. And the material behind the wall is going to have to be surcharged because we're going to get 2 to 6 feet of settlement behind the wall. And so that's going to take some time for that to happen. That's not going to take place with the landfill areas. So those will be done probably quicker than the land is prepared. But there are issues with, we want to use dredged sediment as the surcharge material. So the last part of that consolidation behind the wall will have about 8 feet of soil. The sediments will have to be taken away and brought back to the landfill. So there's some schedule items in regard to that I can't tell you completely until I get the dredging contractors construction schedule and can start putting those pieces all together. Jeff Miller, one of the city attorneys, has drafted an access agreement that would be between PPIC and Atlantic Wood, or I'm sorry, between PPIC and EPA, that will allow us to use this property for the Superfund site. I think eventually we would probably want an easement because we have a permanent landfill on the land. Oftentimes we try to get those before we do this kind of permanent work. But the issues at this site are very complicated with land ownership, and especially because we're filling in part of the river and who's going to ultimately own that land, that we've put those off till we get some of these features actually built. EPA would do a lot of paperwork for that type of thing, and I know that DEQ has already worked up with the city operation and maintenance plan for the landfill, and again, depending on what time a sale goes through, with the idea that the new owner would be responsible for the maintenance of the landfill, the city may not have to do, if it all works out in the best timing, the city may not have to undertake much of the O&M of the landfill.
As far as the O&M of the landfill, let's say we do have a new buyer for that piece of property once all this is done. Can you give a rough idea of what kind of costs are associated with that? Because this buyer is going to have to assume that, and I presume that would be part of the negotiation over the sale. Is that going to be a real hindrance to us?
Most of the maintenance will involve landscaping to a large degree. Landscaping, erosion control, there'll be stormwater drainage controls built into the landfill, so things that you would have to do on a piece of property anyway. Now, worst case, if you had a failure of the landfill, that would be, I think, the worst case for all of us, and I don't know quite how that would be worked out. I know that we've had no problems with the berms we built at Atlantic Wood with erosion issues. It's easy to get cover, grass to grow, and things like that. I think oftentimes in the brownfields issues, you'll have contaminated groundwater underneath. And from what I've observed is when somebody comes in and buys a property, generally they just deal with issues with the land and don't worry about the groundwater at all. The groundwater does need to be monitored over time, and the first 10 years of that EPA is responsible for before it becomes part of DEQ. I think right now the city has responsibility for that, if I'm correct, in the maintenance agreement, although I doubt they'll ever have to do any of that because the first 10 years after we're complete is EPA's responsibility. I think that the issue with selling the property, I think what I picture is an owner is going to be willing to take care of this cap of the landfill. They may not want to do any groundwater sampling, or if I was buying it, I would try not to have to do that. But it's, in my mind, a fairly simple and common thing for people to take care of a clean surface. And, usually what happens with these things, when EPA is done, we wait a year before we say we're really done. So if a problem comes up in the first year, EPA is responsible for taking care of that. So the vegetation areas will be established. If any erosion problems are to happen, they're likely to show up in that very first year. Those will all be EPA's responsibility before we turn that over, before that would ever become something the city would have to take care of.
Okay, that 10-year time limit starts at the time that you turn it over, so 10 years going out
For the groundwater, correct.
How stable is this piece of property gonna be when it's done? I just envision this plateau that you're gonna have to drive up on. Can you give any kind of indication on that? What can be done with it, what can't be done?
The record of decision says that this property needs to be made for typical industrial use. It's gonna be built so Atlantic Wood can operate on it with their gantry cranes and storing their concrete product and,
The equipment, no problem.
equipment, yes, so, I think that, eventually, Atlantic Woods, I think, building one of the bridges, or making the product for one of the bridges across the Elizabeth River up past the high-rise bridge, I believe. And they've had some 200-ton, concrete, or 100-ton concrete members that they've had to ship off. And at that loading dock area that I showed you in the one picture is where they put those on the barges. And we've had to do some some review to make sure that the capacity of the wall is such to handle that extreme load. And eventually all that'll be written down to say what you can and can't, what this cap is actually designed to do, so a owner could then say, here's what I want to do, and think, okay, if I drive this equipment up there, is it gonna sink? But like I say, Atlantic Wood's gonna be able to use their property as they are now. The sediments that come up out of the river will be mixed with about 15% Portland cement to help give them some structural integrity and dried out some before they're placed over there. So it's not going to be a situation where you got really soft mud over there that's going to take a long time before it naturally dries out.
Back on that water monitoring though, how often do you do that? Is that just once a year that you're monitoring that? You're doing it multiple times a year? And then what kind of cost is associated with that? How many wells are you putting in there to do all that monitoring?
The record of decision says to start off every 6 months although I'm already at a point, especially with this expansion of the landfill, thinking that we don't even need it that often. I think eventually it will get down to once or twice every 5 years. Samples, if you're sampling for metals, might be $100 a sample. If you're sampling for volatile organics, it's a couple $100. We haven't figured out whether, so you'd have metals, volatile organics, and semi-volatile organics, which is where you get the creosote and the pentachlorophenol. There is some dioxin in the groundwater out there because of the pentachlorophenol. Our goal in all this is to make it the minimum that's necessary to ensure. The idea is here with the cover and all. We want to make sure there's a groundwater plume that's not growing. It hasn't really grown since all this waste material's been out there. So now that with the stabilization in ground of that one area where the lagoons were, putting a cover on to minimize stormwater infiltration, the opportunity for things to migrate is going to be minimized beyond that.
Worst case scenario, again, if I was buying that land, they find something wrong with it, what happens at that point? Let's say you find the things that you don't want to find in there.
Usually, the whole idea of Brownfield's amendments to the Superfund law in 2002 was to say that if you come in and buy the property after that time, you're not responsible for the legacy waste. And you're only responsible for making sure you don't cause that problem, or you don't create your own problem in addition to what was already out there. You'd be responsible for those two things. But because of that amendments in 2002 is why people will even buy contaminated property. Because generally under Superfund, the current owner is financially responsible, and they can be responsible for things that they had no responsibility for, or didn't cause at all. The other thing, at every Superfund site where we leave waste in place, EPA by law is responsible to conduct a 5-year review, which asks the question, is the cleanup performing as it's anticipated? Is it still, sometimes the science says, well, this contaminant, we used to think you could be exposed to this little bit of it. Now science says you can only be exposed to half of it. So we go back and evaluate cleanups to say, is it still safe to be there? Here, a 5-year review, the biggest impact would be, are people doing the maintenance, and is the cleanup still containing all this material? Because you are going to have a clean cover on top of it. And so if somebody changes and says, oh, pentachlorophenol is more dangerous than we thought, well, nobody's touching the pentachlorophenol because it's in the groundwater that nobody's using, and it's in some of the, and very little of it, practically none of it's actually in the river sediments anyway. So they're going to be operating on a clean cover. With that said, if people have to go back and do some utility work, where they have to dig through that clean cover and into the waste material, that is a very common thing at Superfund sites. And the extra cost to a landowner is they have to have somebody who's trained to handle contaminated material, who might install a sewer line or a water line or something like that, which is one of the benefits if a buyer comes in at the time EPA is getting close to capping, we can do some of that as part of the actual cap. Because I know the fire station in Portsmouth, they had the plans for the utilities, so we left 5 feet, dug down 5 feet and put clean fill. So even though cleanup said you only had to deal with the top 2 feet, we did cleared some utility ways so that when the constructor came in to build the fire station, they did not have to have a hazmat trained construction crew for that subsurface work. And those are things that we can work with PPIC on. There might be some things where you feel like, hey, let's at least run the sewer line to this location. We can talk about those kinds of things. I'm not allowed to do development, or they call it betterment. But what I can do is, if I'm spending the same amount of money, I might as well do it at the way that's most advantageous to you.
I guess I'll just add, to give you some comfort on, marketability and development of these brownfields after all of this. The EDA is under contract to sell property over by the fire station. It was similar to this. I mean, different contaminants and different remediation, but bottom line is it's a brownfield site, and the EDA is successfully selling that to 2 different parties for development.
Now, the one other thing, let's see if I can get I do want to mention, we have Burton's Point Road, and then we have next to it, I believe Burton's Point Road is a 65-foot wide property. Next to it is another 65-foot property. Well, Burton's Point Road is on the railroad property, and the city owns this property next to it. And I bring that up because I know I've been working with Donna for, I don't know, a while, because obviously we have issues in relation to this property. I know that there's been some talk about trying to extend a rail line in here. Is that how we deal with drainage along the side of the road, where the road is, if there's going to be a railroad track, stuff like that, will may become an important discussion as we talk about entranceways into this piece of property. That's not so much a concern to EPA, but in the sense that it doesn't matter to EPA where the road's at, so to speak. Since I have to talk to all these property owners and get access and different stuff like that, some of these issues come up, and I just want to, if those things are going to matter, I just need some feedback about that sooner rather than later.
Is that the Beltline or North Southern CSX? Do we know?
I think it's the actual, is it the Beltline Railroad? I mean, I think it's your railroad, isn't it? It's owned by,
No,
I thought.
we'll find out.
No.
Anyway,
We'll find out, okay. I guess at some point, we should find out, just so that we know all the players there and, there's an issue on that.
I mean, EPA's understanding is it's owned by the Beltline Railroad,
Okay, probably it is.
but,
I'll probably-
and again, that may not matter to this or not, but I think it's worth bringing it up so that the stakeholders can decide whether it matters.
Probably a question for Donna Coleman with the railroad, not Donna Sy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Excuse me, Donna. No wonder I got the look on her face. I've actually talked to Donna Coleman
Right.
recently, and I'm supposed to meet her at the site. Now okay,
Okay,
I'm sorry.
thank you, that's okay.
Well, since you are doing that, I guess one of the things that I'm thinking of is if that is Beltline property and this new structure is 10 to 12 feet above the grade that is there now, what issues are there with running a spur in there if somebody wants a siding, kind of frame to run up that 10 to 12 feet, what kind of grade do they have to have? Those type of things.
I would say probably not without, you'd have to have a slope so gentle you start cutting a lot of the volume of the landfill way out
Right. So that's probably out.
to run a spur up there, yes.
All right, any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much, Randy, it was very informative, and I appreciate it. And that sort of brings us to, I guess, the legal aspect of this, and again, the whole purpose of this is the assumption of the school board property, which is just to the south of the Atlantic, Mountain Pass site there, so, George, if you would like to just walk us through what we're doing from this point on, that would be great.
Well, from this point on, you have to take action to get this rolling. Mr. Sturgeon is giving a good explanation of how everything is set up and what needs to be done. You've got before you a resolution that basically authorizes the chairman to execute a list of documents that's contained at the bottom of the first page of the resolution. It acknowledges and includes the post-closure plan. All of these documents were included in the materials that went out before the meeting, so you should
I'm
have all.
sorry, before we go to the resolution, I thought we were still continuing on this thing, and I have a couple questions for the city, I've got a couple. I'm looking at there's gonna have to be, notifications going on as far as that we're gonna be monitoring, and we have to do notifications. How's this whole thing gonna be working out? Let me find my notes here. These on point C, settlement, substance, and displacement, who's gonna be performing those tasks within the city? It shows the party is supposed to be inspecting it. We're the party. This is back on the, I'm sorry, this is on the post-closure plan.
The O&M plan?
It's the Burton Point post-closure plan. And it's talking about the party's gonna inspect school property quarterly to identify areas of settlement and all these other things. And then we're supposed to also be making notifications if we see anything going on. We being the party being the PPIC. How is that gonna work to where what's the chain of command? How is this whole thing gonna flow? Who's gonna be responsible for that?
The city is gonna be responsible for that, and it's in the, document here where it talks about, the city has all O&M
It's
responsibility.
the memorandum of understanding,
Right.
under the now therefore, page one, Now therefore, I'm sorry, you go over to page 2, number 3. This is number 2. The city shall perform or cause performance of all operation and maintenance agreements, activities required by the post-closure plan. So, this is under the memorandum of understanding that you're authorizing the chairman to execute with the city. It's, again, it's on page 2, number 3.
We're gonna do the heavy work for you guys.
Okay, that's good. I just wanna be sure.
And the light work too, so.
I'm just a volunteer. I didn't wanna make sure I was making phone calls on a Sunday to report something to somebody.
It's us.
Yeah, we're gonna put Guy Wallace next.
Yeah, notified.
What'd you sell now?
Yeah, basically, I think what the city is doing in this whole transaction is letting, PPIC is performing an important function by holding title to the property. The city has agreed that all the nuisances that come with holding the title are gonna be performed by the city. The city's gonna absorb all of that. In the memorandum of understanding also, you notice there's a $200,000 payment that's required, and Randy alluded to that. That $200,000 is not due until either the sale of the property or the, or 2029. If it occurs sooner than 2029, then the proceeds will go to DEQ. They'll be reimbursed for that. If there's a difference, if you sell a property for less than $200,000, then the city has agreed to pay the difference. That's really that provision and the operation and maintenance are really the two critical points in this.
And that 200,000 is a fixed number regardless of the amount of money spent on this site.
That's
Yeah.
the agreement, yes.
Okay.
So, George, where it says the city shall reimburse PPIC for any payment which PPIC is obligated to make to DEQ under the debt agreement, is that a different cost than the 200,000? What is that?
No, that's where you make up the difference. Because you'll be obligated if the sale price is less than $200,000, the city is obligated to make up that difference.
And then this is minor, just teach me from attorney perspective, intend versus will, where it says the city intends to provide the resources. Is that definite, or is that?
That's definite, that's more just, it probably would have been better to say will, but intend, and we can make that change if we have to, but that's just a drafting, so. Actually, that's in the whereas provision of the agreement. That's sort of a statement of it, or it is a statement of intent, but the actual meat of it is down in what it's actually committing itself to do. It sort of sets the stage, and then the agreement is after the now therefore the city and PPIC agree as follows. So those are the hard, that language is harder, more concrete.
Any other questions?
My one last question, I hate to keep on bugging on
No,
this
go ahead.
points and that, but we go through the whole post-closure plan, we get it all finished up and that, maintenance, we haven't sold it yet, maintenance and everything else on the property, will that still be maintained under the city, or will that go back over to PPIC?
City.
Okay, so as I understand procedurally, we have a resolution here, which we will vote on, and assuming or presuming that we adopt this resolution, this will begin this chain of events that will allow us to take over the title of this property, and then from there, allow the EPA to go ahead and begin their work, and things will follow through that way. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, fine. So then I would like to call for, we call for a motion to adopt this resolution.
No, you don't. You have the resolution in front of you. It's lengthy and it's pretty self-explanatory. It essentially says that you agree, that you authorize the chairman to execute and deliver the documents in an MOU. Documents include the memorandum of understanding, the debt and repayment agreement, the 3920 Burton's Point Road post-closure plan, consents to entry are permitted to the EPA and Atlantic Woods in order to perform the work that's specified in the consents to entry. And that includes the placement of the material on the property, because during this, the reason we're going through all of this is that neither EPA nor DEQ will be in the chain of title. They're not acquiring title to this. They're just acquiring the right to deposit the materials on the property, and then the responsibilities with respect to those materials are spelled out among all of the parties. So the real parties in terms of the chain of title are the school board for the larger parcel, the city for the 30-foot strip, and PPIC as the grantee of both properties.
Well, one quick question, since you brought up all of this. Sorry.
You asked the question,
You
you asked a
keep
lawyer,
coming
you're not gonna get a short answer.
No, just real briefly, I mean, so we take title of this property, all this work begins, let's say somebody gets hurt during all of this, where is that liability?
Neither the DEQ nor the EPA will indemnify the PPIC. However, the contractors that they're employing have insurance, and the agreements say that all of those, any claims along those lines are referred to the insurer for the contractor.
You feel like that's
George,
for the city?
if I may, I know that talking with Jeff Miller, he had inserted some language into the access agreement about wanting, I don't know, PPIC listed on the contractor's insurance, which is a very reasonable question.
Yeah, it's usually they're added as an additional
Right.
insured.
EPA does not allow that in our access agreements. And I talked to Jeff about it before he sent it to me, and he said, well, I'm gonna send it anyway, so I have record of you saying no. But it's a totally reasonable question. It doesn't mean that somebody gets hurt, that the contractor's not gonna, it's gonna be workman's comp issue. But we don't have those hold harmless or indemnification requirements.
Indemnification normally will cover to the last dollar. Insurance covers to the limits of the policy. If I believe the way this is set up is probably, other than that provision, is probably standard in terms of insurance. If the contractor does something that causes injury to a third party, not to an employee, but to a third party, and it can be proven, then there would be some discussions with their insurance company about the coverage. But that's the kind of liability.
Yeah, the companies have to have insurance.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're not doing something here, I mean, this commission serves for the city.
Correct.
I don't want to do anything that would make us personally liable or further the liability of the city. This is trying to do something good.
The only way I could see personal liability would be if Ned Barron went out there and actually did something. But in terms of, just by the fact that you're members of an organization that owns the property, I don't see any personal liability there for you. This is the protections that are being put in place for the PPIC are the same that the city would have or require, to the extent that DEQ and EPA allow it. They're the same protections we'd have if the city were to hold up the title instead of PPIC.
All right, that's fine. Is that good with everybody else?
So, just one last time, 200,000 is really the only thing that's in discussion, everything else we're,
Not even that.
okay.
No, that's the
Yeah,
city.
because the city's gonna pick
And
it
the
up.
city will get it,
Yeah.
they're gonna will get it,
If you
okay?
end up giving away the property, the city will owe $200,000, not PPIC. PPIC owes the money, the city agrees to reimburse PPIC for the money.
And there's no other cost that you can tell that we could come along later,
No,
even
not
after our
that- not
terms
that-
have
not that.
expired and.
We've got operation and maintenance being absorbed by the city, and I don't anticipate any other expenses.
Any final questions? Okay, good. Now, do we vote on this resolution? Okay, so we'll need a motion to adopt this resolution in a second. Okay, Mr. Bento moves second.
Second.
Okay, Mr. Barner seconded the motion.
Mr. Barner?
Yes.
Mr. Bento?
Yes.
Ms. Rudisil?
Yes.
Mr. Wallace?
Yes.
Mr. Barner?
Yes.
Motion carries, resolution's adopted.
Very well.
Thank
Thank you very much.
Just to remind you, the resolution covers all the other agreements that we discussed.
Right, right. Okay, good. Well, I appreciate you, George. Thank you very much for your help, and Randy, thank you also for the detailed explanation. Hopefully, this will be the beginning of something good. But, we'll all look forward to seeing the results down the road.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to the city and the school district and they're not PPIC, just about everybody at the DEQ been involved in this over the years. And to have it work out and to see what's gone on in the past 6 months is exciting to me. And I think it's really gonna help EPA with the cleanup as well as provide a more usable piece of property for the city to use over the long term. And I just appreciate working together with everybody. Nita's been great to work with, and thank you for your help.
Great, okay, thank you very much. All right, that takes care of the old business. Is there nothing for closed meeting, I presume? Okay, good. Does anybody else have anything for the benefit of the commission here? If not, thank everybody for attending, and we'll adjourn.